Technology is defined in the Oxford Dictionary as the science of industrial arts. And in the Fun Palace, designed in 1960 for Joan Littlewood, the theatrical producer, with the consulting engineer Frank Newby, I tried to achieve, in effect, a large, mechanized shipyard in which various structures could be built from above by means of gantries, travelling cranes, and intermediate beams, and that these structures would contain the activities as shown, simple in themselves, but would, through their design, be capable of being altered while the building was occupied, and that the access to such structures could be achieved by means of escalators which radiated through 270 degrees from the ground level. The whole structure, therefore, being constantly changing, and such change being achieved by the sort of techniques, materials and technologies already at that time available in advanced engineering, in shipbuilding and aircraft production. The reason for the employment of such techniques was to ease up the choice, to free the opportunities of the individual user as to what they would do next. So one was using a tight, carefully designed technology to achieve a loose, free will social patterning. And that, of course, is the reason why the ground floor was left clear, that even once in the building, you still had an opportunity to decide which way to go. In 1978, this building was completed, this time in North London, the Fun Palace having been in East London. Again, in an area socially deprived and of poor environmental quality. In this case, the client is a charitable trust, Interaction Trust, who not only do work in the immediate vicinity for the community, but have a number of other services and activities in hospitals, theatres, community groups, in a larger area which need to be serviced by this particular structure. Therefore, it's not only a community centre, but it is also the headquarters of a community service. As you can see, it is a difficult site with a railway and old buildings surrounding it. And once again, like the Fun Palace, it is contained within a structure which is not entirely filled. This building is to last for only 20 years, and that which it contains may increase over the 20 years or may decrease, but the overall controlling structure and services grid remains the same, thus preventing other people short of land from poaching. During construction, as often happens with works for charitable groups, money ran short, and this was turned to advantage in the case of the Interaction Centre, because we could occupy the frame which was then serviced and the existing foundations with travelling events that wouldn't normally be housed there. And this slide shows the use of the structure to contain a fairground. Now, the fairground was not only of use to the community, it gave the clients an opportunity to assess the eventual volume of space that they would have under their control. Therefore, the building, while building, became, in effect, a working model. Once again, the time element in when a building is useful for its users or for its operators was blurred. This can only happen if there's a conscious effort made for a looseness in structuring of the original design. To clarify this, I hope, this view shows one end of the structure at present. It's by no means certain that this view will remain for the life of the structure, for the 20 years. It may well alter, but at the present it shows packaged kitchens, mobile classroom, some log cabins from Finland for young children's activities, and a variable roof and staircase related to the larger, simpler areas which are enclosed by the walling. These include such activities as theatre, rehearsal rooms, gymnasia, a bar, a club, and a restaurant. The more particular activities, such as photographic workshops, screen printing, kitchens, electrical workshops, showers, and lavatories, were all prefabricated and totally equipped in a factory 400 miles from the site. They were then trucked down and placed in position adjacent to the larger areas in the order that the client at the present requires. What I mean there is that such cabins may well alter several times within the lifespan, the 20-year lifespan of the total building. Cabins may improve, activities may alter, but it is quite likely that the equipment that such cabins contain will alter even faster than that. So one has 3 timescales of the structuring of the building. A typical view of the resultant structuring of elements of different lifespans can be seen. There are 2 levels of cabins in the background. There is a packaged heating and cooling plant in the middle ground, which is very likely to change over the 20 years. And in the foreground is a prefabricated variable staircase. Its site can be moved, the angle of the stairs can be altered, and the half landings or 3/4 landings can be changed at will. These staircases are used both externally and internally in the building. The control of the change of such elements is in the hands of the user, and each time a change is contemplated, the user does have the opportunity to look around without the help of the architect at the present market of such components to see whether he can improve on what he had. This, I think, is the true definition of the aging of a building. It has something to do with growth as well as with final destruction. I don't think that architecture is merely the design of buildings or particular enclosures. It has a lot to do with the alteration and distortion for socially humane reasons of spaces between buildings, and indeed volumes and spaces that have no particular buildings attached to them. And this slide shows a proposal, which I hope will be built shortly, for 3 large inflatable tubes over an existing pedestrian street in an English South Coast holiday town. They can be inflated or deflated in a very short period, well under 1 hour. And in so doing, one can control both the weather conditions in the street, the amount of sunlight, and indeed vary the local winds and cooling effect. It's nothing more than a municipal umbrella, but it's operated for the well-being of people who forgot to bring their own umbrellas. This view shows the relative scale of these tubes, these giant sausages, over the street. The colouring and indeed the formation of the N shapes can again be altered during their lifetime, which is about 5 to 8 years. The point of playing with the existing environment by means of this lightweight, though quite high, technology is in order to enable those people, and I am not one of them, who feel that a great amount of the built environment should be retained forever, to enable those to at least distort it in the way in which one could distort a lot of our more dreary cathedrals by painting them again as they originally were. I've just suggested, and I hope you noticed, that one of the functions of architecture, I consider, is to achieve an element of delight and enjoyment. This slide shows a not very important building as far as its use goes, but an extremely important building as far as the achievement of the delight for the users and the occupants go, or at least I think so. It is the aviary at the London Zoo, designed by Lord Snowdon, Frank Newby, the engineer, as I mentioned earlier, of the Fun Palace, and myself. It was a very difficult site, it was a very limited budget, and there was very little money for maintenance. The resultant structure avoids any additional supports within the small area, enables the public to walk through without, I hope, disturbing the birds, and reduces maintenance to a minimum. But one easy thing about designing an aviary is that birds don't mind if the shape changes in a high wind. People tend to object to this. And therefore, a technology of tension cables, of point supports, and of moving joints was totally applicable in such a structure, whereas it might not be in other more conventional structures which contain people. However, people have to be contained, but bear in mind that people only go to zoos voluntarily, except for school children, and that they only go inside an aviary, bearing in mind the risks that are inherent in doing so. However, in the design of the footbridge, it not only moves in such a way that may excite school children with an element of danger who are bored by looking at the birds, but it is placed in such a way that the birds themselves are not disturbed by the people being inside. The reason for showing this slide and mentioning that point is that I think increasingly architecture must be concerned with mixing unknown emotions and responses, or at least enabling such unknowns to work together happily. It is beyond the art of the behavioral scientist to predict all the reactions of the users, whether they be human or animal, within any particular structure. Therefore, architecture must be sufficiently accurate to enable this element of doubt and change to be contained. Thus, I'm suggesting that large-scale toys, such as aviaries, for that's what they are, may, in some respects, become prototypes for rather more important and serious enclosures of space in the future. This slide shows an even larger aviary, now under construction, than the previous one. In this case, its main structure is built entirely from reused pylons for lighting towers in football grounds. There is a fashionable appetite for reuse of existing materials. However, I think that in this instance it was economics that demanded it. Once again, the use of a tension structure in an area the exact volume of which is not important is exemplified. Having defined in a few cases where the structure itself doesn't have to be too particular in retaining its shape, I now show a sketch of a project which is not yet under construction, which again its initial use is to contain birds for scientific purposes. This is even larger than the last, but its supports are in fact large walking cranes. This enables the roof structure to be kept level, whatever the level of the ground is, but it enables the whole structure, together with its cladding, which in this case is a mesh, to change its site while keeping its occupants inside. It can walk. It walks slowly, a fifth of a mile in an hour, but it can move. And having discussed earlier the importance of introducing the element of time into the design process and into the product, here is an example of relating time to speed and distance in architecture. This mixing of time, speed, and interval often occurs involuntarily in architecture. The design of a railway platform that isn't entirely cognizant of the length of the train that's going to park alongside it. Examples like that, which are unnecessarily inaccurate. This slide shows a large alternative to a university, the Potteries Thinkbelt, designed 1964 for an industrialized area of the Midlands, the United Kingdom, and based largely for its siting on the network of existing railway lines that were no longer needed for the local industry, which was largely mining. Here, in fact, the elements of the anti-university used the railway lines not merely for transport, but for foundation of the actual activities. So classes took place in the coaches while they were moving. Major goods, and this was largely a technical university, major goods and pieces of equipment were moved by train, and the very unloading of them into areas such as this, which was an experimental applied science area, and other areas which included a small airport. The very moving of such equipment became part of the content of the course of the university. So nothing was hidden. The whole exchange from the static to the dynamic and back to the static was part of the courses that were to be offered in such a university. And such courses were not seen to be exclusive to so-called students. Because the network encompassed 7 highly populated towns, the nature of the carriages designed for the network and the semi-permanent structures that such carriages could fold out when at rest in various railway lines provided a mixture of community uses, such as libraries, advice bureaus, and workshops and classrooms used both by students and the citizens of the town. Thus, various other exchanges, various other subjects of social counselling, joint instruction, could be achieved without building a particular building and without deciding at any one time on a permanent site. Thomas Carlyle once defined the true university as a collection of books. This university was a collection of opportunities for people to meet under beneficially protective situations. Not such a neat definition, but quite a good one.